I came home expecting to hear my daughter's laugh echo down the hallway. Instead, the house was silent. Her room was empty, her backpack was gone, and when I demanded answers, my parents just looked at me and said, "We voted. You don't get a say." Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube. I still remember the exact moment my life split clean in two, the before and the after. It was a Thursday evening, the kind that usually passed without notice. I had just finished a long shift at the clinic, my feet aching inside my shoes and my head buzzing with that dull exhaustion that only comes from trying to hold your life together with both hands. All I wanted was to go home, heat up leftovers, and listen to my daughter Leela tell me about her day. That was our routine. Leela always met me at the door, every single day. Sometimes she'd be bouncing with excitement, hair half out of her braids, words tripping over themselves as she told me about spelling tests or playground drama. Other days, she'd pretend to be too cool for hugs, but she always smiled when she saw me. Always. So when I unlocked the front door that evening and stepped inside to silence, something inside my chest tightened. At first, I didn't panic. You don't jump to worst-case scenarios when you're a parent. Not right away. You tell yourself reasonable things. Maybe she's in her room. Maybe she's at the kitchen table drawing. Maybe she's in the backyard. I set my purse down slowly on the entry table and called out, casual, like always. "Leela, baby, I'm home." Nothing. The house felt wrong. It wasn't just quiet. It was that heavy, swallowed kind of silence that presses against your ears. I kicked off my shoes and walked further in. "Leela?" Still nothing. Now my heart started beating a little faster. Not panic yet, just awareness. I moved toward the kitchen first. The light was on, but the table was empty. Her favorite purple cup sat in the sink, clean and upside down on the rack. That was strange. My mother never left dishes undone when she was watching Leela. Never. A small thread of unease slipped down my spine. "Mom? Dad?" From the living room, my father's voice floated out, calm and steady. "We're in here." Relief washed through me so fast my knees almost softened. Okay, see? Everything's fine. They're here. She's probably just upstairs. I walked into the living room, already halfway forming the question on my lips. But the moment I saw their faces, something cold settled in my stomach. They were sitting side by side on the couch, too still, too composed. My mother's hands were folded neatly in her lap. My father leaned back like he was watching the evening news. Neither of them looked surprised to see me. Neither of them smiled. And Leela wasn't with them. I frowned slightly. "Where's Leela?" They exchanged a look. Not a confused look, not a concerned look, a deliberate one. The kind adults think children don't notice. My pulse kicked up. "Mom," I said again, slower this time. "Where is she?" My mother inhaled through her nose like she was preparing for a difficult conversation. My father cleared his throat. And that's when the air in the room shifted. "We need to talk," my mother said gently. Every instinct in my body went rigid. "No," I said immediately, my voice already sharpening. "Where is my daughter?" My father leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees like he was about to explain something reasonable, something logical, something that made sense. "We made a family decision," he said. The words didn't register at first. Family decision? What are you talking about? I asked, my voice coming out thin. My mother gave me that same look she'd been giving me since I was 16, the one that said she believed she knew better, the one that always made my stomach twist. "We voted," she said calmly, and then she delivered the sentence that still echoes in my head to this day. "You don't get a say." For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misheard her. The room tilted slightly. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" My father's tone turned patient, too patient. "Leela is staying with your sister for a while. It's what's best for her." The words hit me like cold water. Staying with my sister for a while. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline, waiting for reality to snap back into place. It didn't. My hands started to tremble. "You... what?" My voice cracked despite my effort to hold it steady. "You sent my daughter away?" My mother's lips pressed into that familiar thin line. "She needs stability, honey." Something inside my chest cracked open. Stability. The word scraped across my nerves like sandpaper. I took a slow step forward. Where is she right now? "At your sister Marlene's house. She's perfectly fine." Perfectly fine. Like this was normal. Like this was reasonable. Like they hadn't just ripped my child out of my home without my permission. Heat flooded my face, fast and dizzying. "You had no right," I said, my voice dropping dangerously quiet. My mother's expression hardened just slightly. "We absolutely did." And that's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. They weren't sorry. Not even a little bit. They thought they were right. And in that moment, I understood this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a line in the sand. I wish I could tell you I stayed calm in that moment. I didn't. Something primal rose up in my chest, hot, sharp, and immediate, the kind of fear that doesn't feel like fear at all. It feels like rage wearing fear's clothes. "You had no right," I repeated, louder this time, my voice shaking. "She is my daughter." My father sighed like I was the one being unreasonable, like I was raising my voice over something minor, like a misplaced phone charger or a forgotten grocery list. "We're trying to help you," he said. Help. That word almost made me laugh. Instead, I took another step forward, my hands curling into fists at my sides. "By taking my child out of my house without telling me?" My mother finally unfolded her hands, her posture stiffening in that familiar way that meant she was about to dig her heels in. "You've been struggling," she said carefully. "We've all seen it." There it was. The quiet judgment that had been hovering over my life for years, finally spoken out loud. My throat tightened. "Struggling does not give you the right to kidnap my daughter." My father's jaw flexed. "Don't use that word." "What word? Kidnap? Because that's exactly what this feels like." For the first time, my mother's composure cracked just a little. "She is with family," she snapped. "Don't be dramatic." Dramatic. I let out a slow, disbelieving breath and pressed my fingers against my temples, trying to steady the pounding in my head. Think. Don't explode. Get Lila back first. "You will call Marlene right now," I said, forcing my voice into something colder, more controlled, "and you will tell her I'm coming to get my daughter." My parents exchanged another look. That same look, and dread began to creep in under my skin. My father leaned back again, folding his arms. "She's already settled in," he said. The room went very, very still. "What does that mean?" I asked slowly. My mother's voice softened again, but there was steel underneath it. "It means," she said, "we think it would be best if she stayed there for the rest of the school term." For a second, I genuinely couldn't breathe. The rest of the school term? Not overnight, not a weekend visit. They had planned this. My pulse roared in my ears. "You don't get to make that decision." My father's eyes hardened. "As your parents, we absolutely do when our granddaughter's well-being is at stake." That was the moment something old and buried inside me stirred awake. Because this tone, this quiet certainty that they knew better, it wasn't new. It was familiar, painfully familiar. Suddenly, I wasn't just standing in my living room at 32 years old. I was 17 again, standing in the kitchen of their old house while my mother calmly explained why I wasn't allowed to apply to the college I wanted. "It's not practical, Elena." I was 22 again, sitting at the dining table while my father told me moving out on my own was premature. "We're just looking out for you." Every time I tried to make my own choices, every time I tried to draw a line, they had this way of stepping over it while smiling like they were doing me a favor. But this time wasn't about me. This time, they had crossed into something unforgivable. I straightened slowly, my voice dropping into a tone I rarely used with them. "You need to call Marlene right now." My mother's lips pressed thin again. "No." The word landed like a slap. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. "You don't understand," she continued, her voice soft but immovable. "Lila needs consistency. She needs structure. With your work schedule and everything you've been juggling—" Her eyes swept over me in a way that made my skin crawl. "We just don't think your home environment is the most stable right now." There it was. The real accusation. Not spoken directly, but loud enough. My chest tightened painfully. "You think I'm an unfit mother?" My father shifted slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the bluntness of it. "We didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then my mother said something that made my stomach drop all the way to the floor. "We've already spoken to Marlene about possibly extending the arrangement." Extending? Arrangement? They were talking about my child like she was a timeshare. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "How long have you been planning this?" For the first time, neither of them answered right away, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Cold realization crept through my veins. "You went into my house," I said slowly, each word carefully controlled, "packed my daughter's things, and sent her away without even telling me?" My father's voice turned firm. "We did what needed to be done." Something inside me finally snapped tight. I grabbed my car keys off the entry table with a sharp clatter. "I'm going to Marlene's." My mother stood up abruptly. "Elena, don't make this bigger than it needs to be." I turned to face her, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't soften, didn't hesitate, didn't try to keep the peace. "You already made it big," I said quietly. Then I walked toward the door. Behind me, my father's voice followed, calm but warning. If you create conflict, Elena, this could get complicated. My hand froze on the doorknob. Slowly, I turned back. What is that supposed to mean? And the look on my mother's face, that was when the real fear finally began to set in. Because for the first time since I walked through that door, I realized they might not give her back easily. I stood there with my hand still wrapped around the doorknob, my father's words echoing in the tight, suffocating space of my chest. If you create conflict, this could get complicated. Not might, could. The certainty in his voice made my stomach twist. Slowly, very slowly, I turned back to face them fully. My pulse was hammering so loudly in my ears I could barely hear my own thoughts. Complicated how? I asked. My father didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back into the couch again, that same maddening calm settling over his face like he was discussing the weather. My mother, on the other hand, looked almost weary, like this was all unfortunate but necessary. "We're just saying," she began carefully, "that sometimes when families are under stress, it's better to make thoughtful decisions instead of emotional ones." I stared at her. "You took my child," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "What part of this do you think isn't emotional for me?" Her jaw tightened, but she pressed on. "Elena, you've been stretched thin for months, working double shifts, barely sleeping, relying on us more and more for childcare." "Because you insisted on helping," I cut in sharply. My father raised a hand slightly, like he was moderating a meeting. "The point," he said evenly, "is that Lila needs consistency, and right now Marlene can provide that in a way you temporarily can't." Temporarily. The word landed softly, but it carried weight. A quiet judgment wrapped in polite language. My chest felt tight, like someone was slowly winding a rope around my ribs. "You don't get to decide what I can or can't provide," I said. My mother's eyes flickered just for a second with something that looked almost like frustration. "We are her grandparents," she said. "We have a responsibility to speak up when we see something concerning." There it was again. Concerning. Like I was some kind of case file they were reviewing. I took a slow breath through my nose, trying to keep my voice steady even as heat crawled up the back of my neck. "What exactly," I asked carefully, "do you think is so concerning?" For a moment, neither of them spoke, and that silence, it felt heavy with things unsaid. My father cleared his throat. "You've been overwhelmed. Anyone can see that." "That is not neglect," I snapped. "We didn't say it was, but you're implying it." My mother leaned forward slightly, her voice softening into that tone she used when she thought she was being reasonable. "Elena, sweetheart, we're worried about the bigger picture. Lila's routine has been inconsistent. She's been staying here more nights than usual. Her teacher mentioned she seemed tired last week." My head jerked back. "You spoke to her teacher?" The words came out sharp, disbelieving. My parents both froze. Just for a second, but it was enough. Ice slid down my spine. "I said you talked to her school?" I repeated slowly. My father's mouth tightened. "We were gathering information." Something deep in my chest dropped straight through the floor. This wasn't concern. This was surveillance, planning. My fingers curled tightly around my keys. "How long," I asked quietly, "have you been building a case against me?" My mother's face flushed slightly. "That is a very unfair way to frame what's happening." "Is it?" My voice cracked despite my effort to hold it steady. Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you've been preparing for this. Silence stretched again. Too long, too telling. My heart began to pound harder, a sick, creeping realization forming piece by piece. You think you know what's best for her, I said slowly. Neither of them denied it. And that was the moment the fear turned into something sharper, more focused, because this wasn't panic anymore. This was a problem I needed to solve. I straightened my shoulders. I'm going to get my daughter, I said. My mother stood again, more urgently this time. Elena, please don't turn this into a scene at Marlene's house. Lila is already settled for the evening. Settled, like she was at summer camp, like she hadn't been removed from her home without warning. I opened the front door. Cool evening air rushed in, but it did nothing to calm the heat burning under my skin. Behind me, my father's voice came again, firmer this time. You should think carefully before you escalate this. I paused on the threshold, not turning around, not yet. Are you threatening me? I asked quietly. No, he said, we're advising you. Advising. The same word he used when I was 19 and he advised I don't move in with Lila's father. The same word he used when he advised I switch careers. It was never advice, it was pressure dressed up politely. I finally turned to face them one last time, and what I saw on my mother's face made my stomach twist all over again. Because she didn't look nervous, she didn't look worried. She looked certain, like she truly believed time was on their side. Elena, sweetheart, sometimes love means stepping back and letting others help carry the weight. Something in my chest hardened. No, I said quietly. Love means you don't take someone's child behind their back. For the first time that night, my father's composure cracked just slightly. His jaw flexed, but I didn't wait to hear anything else. I stepped outside, shut the door behind me, and walked quickly to my car, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys. As I slid into the driver's seat, one thought kept looping in my head, over and over, louder with every second. They think they can keep her. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Not a chance. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. And I had no idea the next 30 minutes were about to change everything I thought I knew about my own family. The drive to Marlene's house usually took 20 minutes. That night, it felt like hours and seconds all at once. My hands were locked tight on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, shoulders stiff with the kind of tension that settles deep into your bones. Every red light felt personal. Every slow driver in front of me made my chest tighten a little more. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. We voted. You don't get a say. The calm way my mother had said it. The certainty in my father's voice. The way neither of them had looked surprised by my reaction. This had been planned, carefully, quietly. And the more I thought about it, the more little memories started lining up in a way I didn't like. My mother insisting on keeping Lila overnight more often these past few months. My father casually asking about my work schedule. The way they'd both started dropping little comments about structure and routine like they were testing the waters. At the time, I'd brushed it off. I told myself they were just being grandparents. I told myself they meant well. I told myself family wouldn't cross certain lines. I was wrong. By the time I pulled onto Marlene's street, my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking my ribs from the inside. Her house sat halfway down the block, lights warm in the windows, looking painfully normal, like nothing had happened, like my whole world hadn't just tilted sideways. I parked a little too hard at the curb and sat there for 1 second, forcing myself to breathe. In. Out. Don't lose it. You need to be clear, focused, because the last thing I needed was for this to turn into something they could twist against me. I stepped out of the car and walked quickly up the front path, my pulse hammering in my ears. Before I could second-guess myself, I knocked. Once. Twice. The porch light flicked on. Footsteps approached, and then the door opened. Marlene stood there in soft house clothes, her expression already tight around the edges like she knew exactly why I was there. That alone made my stomach drop. "You got here fast," she said quietly. Not surprised, not confused, just prepared. Cold realization slid deeper under my skin. "You knew I was coming," I said. Her lips pressed together. "Mom called." Of course she did. Of course this whole thing had layers. I took a steadying breath and forced my voice to stay even. "Where is Leela?" She hesitated just for a second, and my heart kicked hard against my ribs. "She's upstairs," she said finally. "She's okay, Elena." Okay, like I was supposed to be comforted by that. "I'm taking her home," I said. I started to step forward, but Marlene shifted slightly into the doorway, not fully blocking me, but enough to make my chest go tight. "Elena, maybe we should talk for a minute first." Something sharp sparked in my stomach. "No," I said, "we can talk after I have my daughter." Her eyes flickered with something, worry maybe, or uncertainty, but she didn't move. And that's when the last thread of my patience started to fray. "You don't get to stall me," I said, my voice dropping lower. "I'm not stalling," she said quickly. "I just think I don't care what you think right now." The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't take them back, because in that moment, one thing was crystal clear in my mind. Everyone had been thinking, voting, deciding, except me. Marlene exhaled slowly, rubbing one hand over her arm like she was trying to soothe herself. "She's already in bed," she said. "She finally fell asleep about 20 minutes ago." That made me pause, just for a half second, because no matter how angry I was, I didn't want to scare Leela awake, didn't want her confused, didn't want her caught in the middle of adult tension she didn't create. Marlene must have seen the hesitation flicker across my face, so her voice softened. "She's okay," she repeated gently. "We didn't tell her anything upsetting. We just said she was having a sleepover." Sleepover. The word twisted in my chest, because that meant Leela didn't even know what had really happened, didn't know her whole world had been rearranged without warning. I swallowed hard. "Then I'll wake her gently," I said, "and I'll take her home." Marlene's mouth tightened again. "Elena, Mom and Dad are really worried." Something in me snapped. "I don't care if they're worried," I said, my voice finally cracking with the strain I'd been holding back all evening. "They don't get to remove my child from my home like I'm some kind of visitor in her life." Silence hung between us, thick and uncomfortable. Marlene looked torn, actually torn, and that's the first moment a sliver of something complicated slid into my anger, because unlike my parents, she didn't look certain. She looked conflicted. "Elena," she said quietly, "they think they're helping." I let out a hollow breath. "Yeah," I said softly, "that's what scares me." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly, Marlene stepped back from the doorway, not fully relaxed, but no longer blocking me. "She's upstairs," she said. Relief flooded my chest so fast it almost made me dizzy. I stepped past her into the house, my heart already racing ahead of me toward the staircase, toward my daughter. But as my foot hit the first step, Marlene's voice came quietly from behind me. "Elena, there's something else you should know." My hand tightened on the banister. Every instinct in my body went on high alert. Slowly, I turned my head. "What?" I asked, and the look on my sister's face told me whatever she was about to say was not going to make this easier. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to just go upstairs, scoop Leela into my arms, and walk out of that house without another word. But there was something in Marlene's voice, something careful and uneasy, that made my stomach knot. Slowly, I turned to face her. "What?" I asked again, my voice tight. Marlene stood near the doorway, arms folded loosely across her middle like she was trying to hold herself steady. For the first time since I'd arrived, she didn't look defensive. She looked worried. And that made my pulse pick up all over again. "Mom and Dad," she began slowly, "they didn't just drop her off and leave." Cold slid down my spine. "What does that mean?" Marlene hesitated, and that hesitation made my chest feel like it was being squeezed from the inside. "They've been talking to someone," she said carefully. The words landed softly, but they hit like a brick. Talking to someone. My mind immediately jumped to worst-case scenarios. "Who?" I demanded. Marlene swallowed. "A family lawyer." For a moment, the world went very, very quiet. I just stared at her, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. "A lawyer," I repeated slowly. Marlene nodded once, her eyes searching my face like she was bracing for impact. "They've been worried for a while, Elena. They said they just wanted to understand their options." Options? My fingers tightened painfully around the banister. "What options?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marlene exhaled slowly. "They mentioned temporary guardianship." The floor might as well have dropped out from under me. For a second, I genuinely couldn't feel my legs. Guardianship. Not babysitting, not helping. Guardianship. My heart slammed violently against my ribs. "You're telling me," I said slowly, each word trembling with controlled fury, "that our parents are trying to take legal control of my child?" Marlene's face tightened. "They said it wouldn't be permanent. I don't care what they said." The words came out sharper than I intended, slicing through the air between us, because suddenly all the little pieces from earlier were snapping into place with sickening clarity. The questions about my schedule, the comments about stability, talking to Leela's teacher. This wasn't concern that spiraled out of control. This was preparation, careful, quiet, methodical. My stomach twisted hard. "How long have you known?" I asked. Marlene looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. "A few weeks," she admitted softly. The betrayal stung more than I expected, not as sharp as what my parents had done, but enough to make something ache deep in my chest. "And you didn't think to tell me?" I asked. Her shoulders slumped slightly. "They made it sound like they were just exploring worst-case scenarios. I didn't think they would actually do something like today." I let out a slow breath through my nose, trying to steady the storm building inside me. But the damage was already done, because now the fear wasn't just emotional, it was legal, strategic, calculated. I turned back toward the staircase, my voice tight but controlled. "I'm getting my daughter." Marlene nodded quickly. "Of course. I'm not stopping you." That, at least, sounded genuine. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavy with adrenaline and dread. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint creak of the wood under my feet. At the top of the stairs, I paused outside the guest room. The door was slightly open. Warm lamplight spilled softly into the hallway. And there, curled up under a pale blue blanket, was my baby. Leela lay on her side, one arm tucked under her cheek, her breathing slow and even. Her favorite stuffed rabbit was clutched loosely in her hand, its worn ear twisted the way she always held it when she slept. The sight of her hit me like a wave. Relief, love, fierce protective panic. My throat tightened painfully as I stepped quietly into the room. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her, making sure she was really okay, making sure this wasn't some horrible dream. Her hair was slightly mussed from sleep, and there was a faint crease on her cheek from the pillow. She looked so peaceful, so unaware of the storm swirling around her. My chest ached. Carefully, gently, I sat on the edge of the bed and brushed a soft curl back from her forehead. "Hey, baby," I whispered. Her lashes fluttered. Slowly, sleepily, her eyes opened. For a split second, confusion flickered across her face, then recognition, and that soft, sleepy smile that could melt me every time. "Mommy?" she mumbled. Tears burned instantly behind my eyes. "I'm here, sweetheart." She pushed herself up slightly, rubbing one eye with the back of her hand. "It thought I was having a sleepover," she said groggily. The words twisted in my chest. I forced my voice to stay gentle. "You did," I said softly, "but I came to bring you home." Her face brightened immediately, that easy trust in her eyes nearly break me. "Okay," she said simply. No questions, no hesitation, just trust. I wrapped my arms around her carefully, pulling her into my chest and breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. And in that moment, one thing became absolutely crystal clear in my mind. Whatever my parents thought they were doing, whatever plans they had started putting in motion, they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because I'm not backing down. Not now, not ever. Lila was warm and heavy in my arms as I carried her down the stairs, her head tucked sleepily into the curve of my neck. One small hand was still loosely wrapped around the ear of her stuffed rabbit, and every soft breath she took seemed to steady something wild inside my chest. But only a little, because the moment my feet hit the bottom step, the tension came rushing back. Marlene was standing in the living room exactly where I had left her, her posture tight, her face drawn with worry. She watched us carefully, like she was measuring the temperature of the room. I adjusted Lila gently on my hip. "We're going home," I said. My voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes when something inside you is locked into place. Marlene nodded slowly. "Okay." For a second, neither of us moved. Then she stepped toward the front door and opened it for me without another word. I appreciated that more than I could say. Not forgiveness, not trust, but at least she wasn't making this harder. As I stepped out onto the porch, cool night air brushing against Lila's cheek, she stirred slightly against me. "Mommy?" she murmured. "I've got you, baby," I whispered. She sighed softly and relaxed again. That small sound lit a fierce protective fire deep in my chest, because no matter what storm my parents thought they had started, they had underestimated one very important thing: me. The drive home felt different this time, quieter, sharper. Lila sat in the back seat, buckled in with her blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders. She was awake now, but still soft with sleep, her voice small and curious in the rearview mirror. "Grandma said I could stay longer," she said. My grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Careful. Keep it gentle." "She thought you might want a sleepover," I said evenly. "But I missed you." That was true, and it was enough for now. Lila accepted the answer easily, the way children do when they feel safe. She leaned her head against the window, watching the streetlights slide by. "I like sleepovers," she murmured. "I know you do, sweetheart." Silence settled in the car again, but my mind was anything but quiet. Guardianship, lawyers, options. The words circled like storm clouds. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my exhaustion had been replaced by something colder and more focused. Because one thing was painfully clear now. This wasn't over. Not even close. Inside the house, the air felt different, heavier, like the walls themselves knew something had shifted. Lila padded sleepily toward her room while I followed close behind, watching her every step like I was afraid she might disappear again if I blinked too long. Once she was settled back into her own bed, blanket tucked carefully under her chin, she looked up at me with that soft, trusting expression that always undid me. "You're not working tomorrow, right?" she asked. My chest tightened, because normally I was, but not tomorrow, not after tonight. "No," I said gently, "I'm staying home with you." Her face lit up instantly. "Yay!" Such a small word, such a big weight behind it. I brushed my fingers lightly through her hair until her eyes began to droop again. "Go to sleep, baby." Within minutes, her breathing evened out, soft and steady. I stayed there longer than I needed to, watching, listening, making sure she was really, truly there. Only when I was certain she was fully asleep did I quietly step out her door halfway. And then I finally let the mask drop. My shoulders sagged, my hands started to shake, because now that the immediate crisis was over, the reality of what my parents had tried to do was settling in fully. They hadn't just overstepped, they had been preparing to challenge me, legally, strategically. My stomach turned. I walked slowly into the kitchen and leaned both hands against the counter, staring down at the cool marble surface while my thoughts raced. Think. Don't react blindly. Think. Because if they had already spoken to a lawyer, then I needed to stop assuming this was just family drama. This was something else now, something that could spiral very quickly if I handled it wrong. My phone sat heavy in my pocket. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Then slowly, I pulled it out. There was only one person I trusted to give me straight answers without sugarcoating anything. I scrolled to the contact and hit call. It rang twice, 3 times. Then a familiar voice answered, warm but alert. "Elena, everything okay?" I swallowed. "No," I said quietly. "I think my parents are trying to build a case against me." There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice shifted, sharper now. "Start from the beginning," she said. And for the first time that night, I did. By the time I hung up the phone, my kitchen felt smaller. Not physically, but mentally, like the walls had closed in around the reality of what I was dealing with. I stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing, my phone still warm in my hand. The conversation replayed in my head piece by piece, every word landing heavier the second time around. Because what I had just heard wasn't comforting, it was clarifying. And clarity can be terrifying when you finally see the full picture. I pushed away from the counter and slowly sank into one of the kitchen chairs, exhaustion finally creeping into my bones now that the adrenaline had started to wear off. But sleep wasn't coming tonight, not even close, because my parents hadn't just crossed a line, they had stepped into legal territory. And according to the very calm, very direct advice I had just received, that changed everything. The first thing my friend had said, after listening very carefully to everything, was something that made my stomach drop. Elena, you need to start documenting everything. Not later, not if things escalated, now. Because the moment grandparents start talking about guardianship, the situation stops being purely emotional. It becomes procedural, strategic, paper-driven. That word again, strategic, made my chest tighten because it meant one thing very clearly. My parents believed they had a case. I rubbed my forehead slowly, trying to steady the swirl of thoughts threatening to overwhelm me. The second thing she had said was even more sobering. From what you've described, they can't just take her, but if they're serious, they may try to build an argument around stability and best interest. Best interest. It sounded so reasonable on the surface, so harmless, until you realized how easily it could be twisted. I stood up abruptly and began pacing the kitchen, my bare feet silent against the tile. Think, what exactly were they seeing? What were they collecting? Because the more I replayed the past few months, the more little moments started to feel different. The extra questions about my schedule, my mother casually asking how many hours I'd been working lately, my father offering a little too eagerly to keep Lila overnight when I had early shifts. At the time, it had felt like support. Now it felt like surveillance. A cold shiver slid down my spine. Had they been counting, tracking, building a quiet narrative behind my back? My stomach twisted hard, because if they were trying to frame this around stability, then I already knew exactly what they were going to point at. My work hours, the fact that I was a single parent, the nights Lila stayed with them when my shifts ran late. Individually, none of it meant neglect, not even close. But arranged carefully, it could be made to look messy, inconsistent, unstable. I stopped pacing again and pressed my hands flat against the counter, grounding myself. No, panic helps no one, especially not Lila. The third thing my friend had told me echoed now, firm and unmistakable. Do not engage emotionally with them right now. Stay calm, stay factual, and for the love of everything, don't let them bait you into looking reactive. I let out a slow breath. Easier said than done, because right now, every protective instinct in my body was still on high alert, still ready to fight. But she was right. This wasn't just about being right. It was about being smart, careful, deliberate. For the first time that night, I walked quietly down the hallway again and paused outside Lila's door. I pushed it open just slightly. She was still fast asleep, one arm flung across her pillow, completely unaware of the storm swirling around her life. My chest softened and ached all at once. This wasn't about winning against my parents. This was about protecting her peace, her stability, her sense of home. And that meant I needed to be 10 steps ahead of whatever my parents thought they were doing. I closed the door gently and returned to the kitchen. Then I did something small, but important. I grabbed a notebook from the junk drawer, sat down, and started writing. Date, time, what happened, everything, every word I could remember from earlier. We voted, you don't get a say. Even seeing the sentence written in my own handwriting made my jaw tighten, because it still didn't feel real. But it was, and something deep in my gut told me this wasn't the end of it, not even close. because my parents weren't impulsive people. They were planners, careful, patient, and people like that don't make one move and stop. They escalate, quietly, methodically. I had just finished writing when my phone buzzed softly on the table. My heart gave one sharp, unpleasant thud, because somehow I already knew who it was. Slowly, I turned the phone over, and sure enough, Mom. I stared at the screen for a long moment while it continued to vibrate gently against the table. Then it stopped. A second later, a message came through. I opened it, and the moment I read her words, I felt the ground shift under my feet all over again. Because this time, she wasn't asking, she was warning. For a long moment, I just stared at the message. My mother's words sat there on the screen, calm and carefully phrased in a way that would have sounded reasonable to anyone who didn't know her the way I did. But I did know her, and I could hear the steel underneath every polite syllable. Elena, we need to have a serious conversation tomorrow. What happened tonight was unfortunate, but continuing to act impulsively will only make things harder for everyone, especially Lila. My jaw tightened slowly. Impulsively. That was how she was framing this. Like I had overreacted, like I was the unstable variable in this equation. I set the phone down carefully on the table, forcing myself to breathe slowly through the surge of heat rising in my chest. Don't take the bait. Don't react emotionally. Stay calm, stay factual. The advice echoed clearly in my head, but following it was a whole different challenge when it was my child at the center of the storm. I picked the phone back up and read the message again, more carefully this time. There was something else there, something subtle but deliberate. Not a request to talk, not even really an invitation, a setup. The phrase, especially Lila, wasn't accidental. It was pressure, the quiet kind, the kind my mother had always been very, very good at. I leaned back in my chair slowly, my mind already shifting into a different gear. Because if she was reaching out this quickly, then they were already reacting to tonight, already adjusting their strategy, which meant one thing very clearly. They hadn't expected me to move this fast. A small, cold clarity settled into my chest. Good. Let them be a little off balance. I opened a new message window and typed carefully, choosing every word with intention. I'm available to talk tomorrow. For now, Lila is home and resting. We can discuss concerns calmly and respectfully in the morning. I read it twice before sending. Neutral, calm, documented, exactly the way my friend had advised. The 3 little dots appeared almost immediately. Of course they did. My mother never slept well when she thought she was losing control of a situation. Her reply came through less than 10 seconds later. We are only trying to do what's best for her. I stared at the screen, a slow exhale leaving my lungs. There it was again. Best for her. The shield behind which every overstep was being justified. I didn't respond this time. Instead, I set the phone face down on the table and pressed my fingers lightly against my temples. Because beneath the anger, beneath the fear, something else was settling in. Understanding. Not agreement, never that, but clarity about the battlefield I was standing on. My parents genuinely believed they were right, which made this more dangerous than simple malice, because people who think they're protecting a child don't back down easily. The next morning came too quickly. I don't think I slept more than an hour, and even that had been light and restless, my mind running in tight circles the entire night. By the time sunlight filtered softly through the kitchen window, I was already awake, already moving carefully through the house. Lila padded into the kitchen in her pajamas not long after, hair messy and eyes still soft with sleep. "Morning, Mommy," she said, climbing into her usual chair. My chest warmed instantly. No matter what else was happening, this right here was my center. "Morning, baby," I said gently. She chattered easily over breakfast, completely unaware of the tension sitting just under the surface of everything. I let her talk about school and her art project and the book her teacher was reading to the class. Normal. She deserved normal. But right around mid-morning, my phone buzzed again. I didn't have to look to know. Still, my pulse ticked up slightly as I turned the screen over. Mom, again. This time the message was shorter. "We're coming by at noon. We need to talk in person." Not asking, not suggesting, informing. My jaw tightened slowly. There was that certainty again, that assumption of access, of authority. For a brief moment, the old reflex stirred, the one that used to make me automatically accommodate, automatically smooth things over. But that reflex didn't have the same power it used to. Not after last night, not after I'd seen just how far they were willing to go. I typed slowly, deliberately. "No, I'm not comfortable with an unplanned visit. We can schedule a time to talk when everyone is calm and prepared." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The response came faster this time. "Elena, avoiding this conversation will not help your position." My stomach dropped. Position. Not feelings, not family. Position. There it was, out in the open now. They were thinking in terms of leverage, of narrative, of advantage. And in that moment, the last lingering piece of doubt quietly fell away inside me. This wasn't just worried grandparents overstepping. This was something much more deliberate. I set the phone down slowly, my expression hardening without me even meaning it to, because now I understood exactly what kind of situation I was in. And more importantly, I understood something else too. If my parents thought I was going to fold under pressure the way I used to when I was younger, they were about to learn just how wrong they were.